Three girls, three different towns, three ordinary days that ended without answers. Corinne Perry, 17, vanished from a laundromat in Iowa. Her folded clothes were left behind, but she was gone without a trace. The Grimes sisters, Barbara and Patricia, disappeared after watching a movie in Chicago. Weeks later, their bodies were found, clean, posed, and silent. Melissa Witt, 19, was taken from a parking lot in Arkansas. Her earring was left near her car. Her body turned up weeks later, buried in the woods. Different names, different years, but one thing connects them. They were taken quietly by someone who knew how to disappear. A man who smiled and got away. The Grimes sisters, Illinois, 1956. Charles Leroy Melquist never raised suspicion. At 23, he passed as ordinary, the kind of man who smiled at clerks, paid his rent on time, and looked forgettable in every way that made him safe. In the suburbs of Illinois, where quiet was a way of life, Melquist moved like a ghost who had never died, just a man with a polite nod and too many secrets under his breath. When Barbara and Patricia Grimes, Barbara was 15, Patricia 12. The Grimes sisters were regular Chicago girls with a soft spot for Elvis Presley and an innocent view of the world. On the icy evening of December 28, they left their home in McKinley Park to see Love Me Tender for the 11th time. The theater was less than 2 miles away. They had $2.50 between them, enough for tickets, snacks, and bus fare. It was routine. Their mother, Loretta, stood at the doorway, waved them off, and watched them disappear down the sidewalk. They never came back. A friend saw them during the intermission, laughing, chatting, perfectly content. There was nothing unusual. They stayed for the second showing. By midnight, they should have been home. At 12:30, their mother sent 2 of their siblings to the nearest bus stop. They waited. 3 buses came. None carried the girls. At 2:15 a.m., Loretta called the police. The response wasn't urgent. The girls were labeled runaways almost immediately. Maybe they had gone off with friends. Maybe they were chasing a dream. Maybe Elvis was in town and they wanted to find him. These were the theories that felt safe, the ones that didn't require imagining 2 little girls cold, alone, or worse. But Loretta knew better. Barbara and Patricia were not impulsive. They hadn't packed bags. They hadn't withdrawn money. They hadn't taken extra clothes or shoes. They weren't running from something. They were simply gone. The morning brought fear. By noon, panic had replaced doubt. Police expanded the search, handing out flyers, knocking on doors. Rumors started to swirl. Someone had seen them at a diner. Another claimed they boarded a CTA bus. A woman in Tennessee said she'd seen them at a job center. The reports were everywhere, and they were nowhere. Even Elvis got involved. From across the country, he issued a plea. If you're good fans, please go home and ease your mother's heart. But they didn't go home. The investigation grew. Over 15,000 flyers were posted. More than 300,000 people were questioned. Lakes were searched, ditches dredged, schools and factories and bus stops scoured. It became one of the largest missing persons investigations in Illinois history. But nothing stuck. No clue led anywhere. No voice spoke the truth. Until it was too late. January 22nd, 1957. 25 days after the girls vanished. The cold had deepened. The city had grown quieter. On a remote stretch of German Church Road in Willow Springs, Leonard Prescott was driving when he noticed something behind a guardrail. Two shapes in the snow. He thought they were mannequins. ... Later, he returned with his wife. When she saw them, she screamed. The bodies lay curled together, frozen and pale. Barbara and Patricia, unclothed, posed. Patricia's body was partially draped over her sister's face, as if she'd been placed there to shield her. There was no blood, no obvious injuries, but the details mattered. Barbara had small puncture wounds on her chest. Patricia's face showed blunt force trauma. Both bodies had been cleaned, scrubbed. Someone had taken time with them. The official cause of death, shock due to exposure. But to many, that felt like an insult. Detectives whispered what they couldn't prove. The girls had likely been held somewhere, maybe for days, possibly abused, then discarded. But by the time they were found, it was hard to tell. The snow had wiped away footprints. The cold had erased time. And whoever had placed them there did so with a kind of unsettling care. Then came the phone calls. The first one came a few months after the funeral. Loretta answered. A man's voice, calm, almost amused. He described Patricia's toes, crossed slightly. A birth defect never made public. Then he laughed and hung up. 1 year later, another call, another perfect crime, he said. Then silence. Loretta told the police, again and again, but they had no suspect, no trace of the call, no voice match, just her word and a growing fear that the person who had taken her daughters hadn't left. He had simply moved on, and maybe he had. In 1958, a new name surfaced, Bonnie Lee Scott, 15 years old, gone without a trace. Last seen with a young man named Charles Leroy Melquist. 2 months later, her body was discovered, decapitated, disposed of with the same eerie precision. Less than 10 miles from where Barbara and Patricia had been found. This time, they got him. Melquist was arrested, convicted, sentenced to 99 years in prison. But somehow, incredibly, the Grimes case was never brought up. He was never questioned about the sisters, never connected officially to their deaths. Despite the timeline, despite the pattern, despite the cruelty that echoed too close. Retired officer Raymond Johnson would later review the Grimes file. He followed the breadcrumbs, the ages, the method, the signature silence. It all pointed to Melquist. He was sure of it. Point. But justice has a time limit, and evidence doesn't wait. by the time Johnson voiced his theory, Melquist was dead. He died in 2010, a free man, never charged, never named, never made to answer for what he may have done. The Grimes sisters never got their justice, but their story changed Chicago. Parents stopped letting children walk to movie theaters alone. Police updated how they handled disappearances. Detectives began to learn that evil doesn't always snarl. Sometimes it smiles. Loretta Grimes never found peace. She died believing she had spoken to the man who killed her daughters. The phone call still rang in her ears. The sound of someone who enjoyed being unknown. The city tried to move on, but the case lingered, a ghost sewn into the sidewalks of McKinley Park. A reminder that sometimes the devil doesn't knock. Sometimes he walks right by, nods politely, and leaves behind nothing but two girls, a phone call, and a lifetime of questions. Grimes' case. Some killers wear masks. Others wear a grin. Charles Melquist died without ever facing justice for Barbara and Patricia. But Loretta knew. The city knew. And if ghosts can speak, maybe the Grimes sisters are still waiting for the truth to be heard. Sometimes evil doesn't need to hide. It just needs a little time and a smile. Vanished without a sound. The Melissa Witt case. Fort Smith, Arkansas, 1994. Fort Smith was the kind of town where little things stayed little. Arguments got resolved over dinner. Grocery clerks still asked about your day. And the most excitement you'd hear on a Thursday might be a story about someone's cousin winning a scratch-off. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to become a permanent headline in the annals of unsolved crime. But on December 1st, 1994, everything changed. That afternoon, 19-year-old Melissa Witt stepped out of her car in the parking lot of Bowling World, a local hangout just off Rogers Avenue, where her mother worked part-time. Maybe she was planning to surprise her. Maybe they had argued earlier, and this was her way of saying, "I'm sorry." No one knows for sure. She never made it inside. There were no screams, no chaos, no broken glass or tire marks. Just her car, driver's door ajar, and the kind of stillness that makes your stomach turn. A single gold hoop earring, bent and lightly bloodied, was found near the front tire, and next to it, a faint smear of red. Melissa Witt didn't run away. She was taken, silently, cleanly, without a soul noticing. Her mother, Michelle, would later describe the day as the moment Fort Smith lost its innocence. She said the sun looked normal. The air felt normal. Everything about that day was painfully ordinary, except for what was missing. Melissa had always been independent, a student at West Stark Community College. She was working toward a future in dental hygiene. She had plans to finish school, to travel, to leave the quiet comfort of her hometown and carve out something bigger. But she was still grounded, still the kind of daughter who called home, who laughed at her mom's stories, who never forgot to say goodnight. That afternoon, she pulled into the parking lot with no intention of disappearing. But the moment she stepped out of her car, something happened. And whatever it was, it left no one behind to describe it. By sundown, she was reported missing. Police sealed off the scene. Flyers were printed. Dogs were brought in. Neighbors combed ditches and woods with flashlights, calling her name into the dark. But nothing came back. The parking lot, less than half a mile from a major highway, had become a black hole. No camera footage, no credible witnesses, just a single bloodied earring and a rising sense of dread. Michelle Witt didn't sleep that night. She made phone calls, rechecked the scene, went over every interaction from that morning, every friend, every possible route her daughter could have taken. She asked questions the police hadn't even thought of yet, and when no answers came, she kept asking. Investigators considered everyone: a former boyfriend, a coworker, a local mechanic with a criminal past. They interrogated, cross-referenced, pulled background reports, but nothing stuck. DNA was limited. Technology in 1994 was still learning how to speak the language of certainty. And the truth, whatever it was, remained buried. The abduction, they believed, had not been rushed. It wasn't a crime of impulse. Whoever took Melissa had planned it. They knew the layout. They knew when she'd arrive. And worst of all, they knew how to make her go with them without raising alarm. Melissa wasn't snatched off a busy street or dragged from a party. She was taken in broad daylight, in a familiar place, in the heartbeat between one footstep and the next. 43 days passed. January 13th, 1995. Two hunters were walking through the Ozark National Forest, some 55 miles northeast of Fort Smith, when they caught a strange smell carried on the winter air. Following it, they came to a shallow grave. It was crudely covered, but deliberate. Inside, no ID, but near the body lay a single gold hoop earring. It matched the one found in the Bowling World parking lot. Melissa Witt had been found. The autopsy revealed little. The cold had preserved the body, but the elements had still taken too much. There were no broken bones, no defensive wounds, no clear cause of death. She had been buried on her back, arms at her sides, as if gently placed. No rope, no tape, no fingerprints. It wasn't a dump site. It was almost ceremonial, and that made it worse. Suspects came and went. A man in a brown pickup truck seen in the area that day. An older ex-boyfriend with jealousy issues. A mechanic with past assault charges. But each one dissolved under scrutiny. Alibis held. Nothing placed him near Fort Smith. At least, nothing that could be proven. The FBI was brought in. Profilers, forensic psychologists. They studied the case like a language. Their conclusion was terrifyingly precise. Melissa likely knew her killer. This was not a random act, not the work of a passing stranger. It was someone who could speak to her, make her pause, convince her to lower her guard. That's how it happens, they said. Not with screaming, but with trust. Michelle Witt refused to become a tragic footnote. She didn't disappear into grief. She weaponized it. She became the voice of the case, pushed for new technologies, hounded cold case units, showed up at conferences, funded renewed DNA testing. She turned Melissa's face into a symbol, not of loss, but of refusal. Refusal to forget. Refusal to stop. Refusal to let a killer walk free while the rest of the world kept turning. Years passed. New suspects emerged, only to vanish under the weight of inconclusive results. Forensic tools grew sharper, but the picture never cleared. The case stayed open. But it never moved. It hovered, like fog, always there, never solid. Today, the Bowling World parking lot is still there. Same faded lines, same buzzing neon. Most of the town walks by without a second glance. New generations drive over the same asphalt, and many don't know what happened there, or worse, have started to forget. But Melissa's story lives on, in podcasts, on forums, in corners of the internet where strangers share theories, grief, and a need for answers. People who never met her now carry the weight of her name, like a borrowed memory. If Melissa were alive today, she'd be 49. Maybe she'd have a family. Maybe she'd own a small dental practice with her name in gold on the window. Maybe she'd be telling her kids about the time she saw her favorite band in college, or helping a patient with braces remember to smile. Instead, she's a ghost in her own story, framed in graduation photos, frozen in the year 1994, a name written on a grave, a file that never closes. Somewhere out there, someone knows. Someone remembers the sound of her voice, the weight of the shovel, the silence after it was done. And maybe, just maybe, that silence is the one thing they can't escape. The girl who folded her clothes and never came back. Corinne Perry, Iowa, 1983. She was 17, still stuck in that in-between space, too young to vote, too old to vanish without someone noticing. Corinne Perry wasn't the kind of girl who went looking for trouble. She lived in a small town, followed the rules, and kept her world simple. School, family, chores, and the occasional drive to the laundromat. It was a Wednesday. Not the kind of day stories are made of. The sky was quiet, the wind soft. Corinne had a basket of clothes in the back seat and a few coins jingling in her jeans pocket. She told her mom she'd be back in an hour. It was the last week of October, and fall had settled gently over Iowa, the kind of golden orange season that made everything feel safe. She pulled into the laundromat, the one just 2 miles from home, tucked between a diner and a convenience store. Nothing unusual. A few cars in the lot, a vending machine humming beside the entrance. She parked, locked the car, went inside. Around 3:15 p.m. An elderly woman with poor eyesight told police she saw Corinne folding her laundry. Calm, methodical, alone. By 4:30, Corinne's mom began to worry. Corinne was punctual. She hated being late. At 5, she drove to the laundromat. The car was there, doors locked, the basket empty, the clothes folded neatly, stacked in the back seat, her purse zipped, her keys still inside. But Corinne was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no broken nails, no shattered glass, no trail of blood, just silence, a kind of stillness that made everything feel wrong. It didn't look like something had happened. It looked like someone had erased her. The police arrived quickly. They questioned nearby shop owners, collected statements, and looked for clues. One of the laundromat cameras, the one facing the entrance, turned out to be fake. Just a plastic shell bolted to the wall to scare shoplifters. They found a receipt in Corinne's car for a soda from the vending machine. Timestamp 3:11 p.m. That meant she was alive and well just minutes before the last known sighting. Then came the blank space. No witnesses, no sounds, no help. By morning, the search had already begun. Volunteers stapled flyers to telephone poles. Her school photo, soft smile, light hair, appeared on gas station windows and grocery store doors. Her mother called everyone. The sheriff, reporters, local TV. But in small towns, girls like Corinne were often called runaways first, and that label slowed everything down. But her mother knew better. Corinne hadn't packed a bag, hadn't taken her journal. She didn't even bring a change of shoes. She had laundry and a few coins and a promise to come home by dinner. Instead, she had vanished. They searched the woods first, not because they thought she was there, but because when there's no trail, people turn back to nature. Dozens of neighbors, some in hunting gear, some in sneakers, combed through tall grass, ditch beds, and tree lines with sticks and flashlights, calling her name, hoping for an echo. Nothing answered. Dogs picked up no scent, no trace from the laundromat. It was as if Corinne had stepped through a door no one else could see and closed it behind her. Her mother started driving the rural roads at night, tracing every gravel turn with headlights and desperation. She slowed near bridges. She checked drainage ditches. Sometimes she'd just stop and listen, as if her daughter might call from the dark. There were theories, always are. A man said he saw a pickup truck idling behind the laundromat around 3:30. Someone else mentioned a drifter in town the week before, asking odd questions. A third insisted Corinne had probably run away, maybe with someone older. But her diary hadn't changed. Her money was untouched. She had plans, college applications, a Halloween costume she'd half finished and left on her bedroom chair. Every theory led to nowhere, and every dead end chipped away at what little hope was left. 2 weeks passed. 14 nights of silence, prayers and cold meals left untouched. Her mother stopped changing clothes, She wore the same sweater every day, the one Corinne last saw her in. She refused to wash her daughter's bedsheets. She still left the porch light on. And then, on a quiet afternoon, a man walking his dog across a small bridge at the edge of town saw something unusual. A purse wedged between the rusted guardrail and a concrete pillar. Not thrown, not hidden, placed. Inside was everything: wallet, driver's license, lip balm, comb, all untouched. Nothing stolen, nothing torn, just waiting. The bridge wasn't far from the laundromat, but far enough that it didn't feel random. It was a place only locals used. Shortcuts for kids on bikes and parents late for dinner. The police dusted it for prints. Nothing. They looked for tire tracks nearby. Too many. Too old. Exactly 2 weeks after her daughter vanished. Almost to the hour. Her purse appeared like a ghost, knocking gently on the door. Not to solve the case. Just to remind them it was still open. After that, the town held its breath. People locked their doors earlier. The laundromat installed a real camera. Strangers became suspects. But the case stayed still. For more than a year, nothing surfaced. Corinne's name faded from newspapers. Her photo yellowed on bulletin boards. The search parties stopped walking the woods, but her mother never stopped. She collected tips. She held meetings. She even hired a private investigator. He came back months later, empty-handed. No suspects, no evidence, no confession. It was late November 1984 when a hunter found something strange along the edge of a harvested cornfield. A patch of soil that looked wrong. Too soft, too flat. He thought it was where someone had buried a deer. It wasn't. The police uncovered a shallow grave, just 18 inches deep. Inside were the remains of a girl, partially clothed, bones weathered by rain and time. A belt nearby. No shoes. No bag. Dental records confirmed it was Corinne. The autopsy couldn't say how she died. There were no bullets, no stab wounds, no broken bones. Maybe she had been strangled, maybe smothered, maybe both. But what chilled everyone, even seasoned officers, was the condition of the grave. It had been shaped, smoothed, covered with small branches, not a dumping ground, not carelessness. Someone had buried her with intention. And somehow, that made it worse. The investigation reignited, briefly. There were a few names that stood out. A part-time janitor at a nearby school who had been reported for staring at students. A truck driver who had left town the week Corinne disappeared. A man who used to work at the laundromat, but was fired after making customers uncomfortable. But none of them stuck. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, no arrests. Time is cruel to cold cases. Evidence degrades. People forget. Truth becomes legend. And eventually, even justice stops knocking. Corinne was buried in a small cemetery outside town. No headstone at first, just a wooden cross, her name scratched in by hand. Her mother couldn't afford more, but someone remembered. Years later, flowers appeared, then a bench, then a small plaque. It read, "Folded clothes, unfolded pain." No one knew who left them. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was love. Or maybe it was both. Some crimes leave behind blood. Others leave behind silence. Corinne Perry didn't vanish into thin air. She was taken. And whoever took her did it quietly, carefully, like they knew exactly how to erase a life without leaving a mess. But in the stillness, something always lingers. Folded laundry, a locked car, and the name of a girl who never came home. They didn't vanish. They were taken by someone patient, someone practiced, someone who knew how to end a life without leaving a trace. No screams, no blood, no witnesses, just the echo of a locked car door, a movie seat never filled, a gold earring pressed into the dirt, and somewhere out there is a person who remembers everything. The moment he reached out, the weight of her silence, the feel of the shovel, and he's still free. These girls didn't become legends. They became unfinished stories. And until their names are answered with justice, every quiet town has reason to be afraid.